We are NAP, and I'm sorry I have to start over, but this is Marie's essay on the House of Seven Gables. In the House of Seven Gables, Hawthorne uses violence to illustrate the character's relationship with the past. Each time a character dies from apoplexy, the remaining characters have choices to make. The choices made by the characters following the deaths of Colonel Pynchon, Jaffrey Pynchon, and Judge Pynchon determine whether they will become slaves to the past or not. So I thought her articulation of the meaning of the book was a little different. She focused on choices, and then slaves to the past. A lot of you mentioned the past, but you notice how it's clear that that's the subject of her paper. That's the meaning of the book, and the others are simply examples. I think one thing that we sometimes do is we think of the paper ends up being three papers. You know, it's a paper about this, and they're tied together by violence, which could work, but you need to think more of the meaning of the book. What does violence teach us? And then you're going to illustrate that by one, two, or you're going to say three things about it. But anyway, she goes on. When Colonel Pynchon dies of apoplexy, the remaining Pynchons have several choices to make. First, they make the most important choice, to believe that Maul's curse is the cause of the colonel's death. This leads them to make several other choices that make them slaves of the past. Pause just a minute. It doesn't hurt to repeat like the key things, like choices or slaves of the past. I mean, it actually is probably helpful for your reader to hear those terms, because it shows him or her that is your subject, you're sticking to it, and you're bringing everything back to that. Despite the Pynchon's belief that Maul's curse caused Colonel Pynchon's death, they don't do anything to try to make things right. Instead, they keep the House of the Seven Gables and the land its own, rather than returning it to its rightful owner, the Mauls. The Pynchons also decide to obey Colonel Pynchon's wish by keeping his portrait on the wall of the parlor. Because they keep this reminder of him, the Pynchons never discover the deed to the land in the east and remain slaves to the past. All right, after Jaffrey Pynchon's death, Judge Pynchon makes a decision or choice that causes others to become slaves of the past. To conceal the fact that he was the cause of Jaffrey's death, the judge frames Clifford and makes him and Hepzibah slaves of the past. Clifford's slavery is more prevalent than Hepzibah's because he actually goes to jail, but Hepzibah is in a different kind of jail. Hepzibah is left as the sole occupant of the House of Seven Gables and lives in strict seclusion over 25 years. Even after Clifford is released from jail and comes back to live with Hepzibah, he is trapped within the jail of his past and not fully himself. Hepzibah can't leave her jail either. Once Clifford returns, they prepare to go to church one day, but Clifford tells Hepzibah they can't. So they return to the house and submit to the past. Quote, "For what other dungeon is so dark as one's own heart? What jailer so inexorable as oneself?" End quote. In this way, Judge Pynchon chooses to make Clifford and Hepzibah slaves of the past, and Clifford and Hepzibah choose to remain that way. Finally, when Judge Pynchon dies, the Pynchons accept the truth and are set free from the past. When Clifford and Hepzibah discover the dead Judge Clifford, and they discover the dead judge, Clifford exclaims, "The weight is gone, Hepzibah." In this moment, Clifford and Hepzibah are free from the past. Their freedom manifests itself in their journey from the house. While they are gone, the only other remaining Pynchon, Phoebe, learns of the judge's death. And when the three Pynchons are reunited, they accept the truth that Maul's curse was not the cause of the colonel's, Jaffrey's, or the judge's deaths. It was really just a medical condition that was triggered by stress. The Pynchons' new freedom reaches fulfillment when they leave the House of the Seven Gables, which represents their slavery to the past, and move to the judge's house. In this way, The judge's death provided both freedom and a place to enjoy it. By leaving the House of Seven Gables, the pensions choose to free themselves from the past and look towards their future. The choices made by the characters following the deaths of the Colonel, Jaffrey, and the judge determine whether they will become slaves to the past or not. In the end, the pensions made the right choice to move on from the past and towards the future. This shows how violence in the novel ultimately illustrated the character's relationship with the past. So I thought she did. Others had a different approach. It was equally good. Several of you pointed out just the irony and of how the story ends. You know, it took death in order. It's a paradox, right? Death leads to life, and anything like that you can do is helpful. So, good job with that. We're going to write again on, like I say, a poem in a few weeks. Probably won't do it this week. We'll do it when we come back. So, good job. So, let's see what's next. If you have your book with you, you don't have to. We won't have a full-fledged discussion, but I would like, in my absence, I know we didn't get to talk about it, so if you can think about that first chapter and be reading the second chapter this week for Thursday. I don't think we're going to be having class Friday. So for Thursday, if you would get if you have it, or if you can think about it just a second, I'll be working on those quizzes. Thoughts about the book? I know this is kind of springing it on you because it's been a week. Yeah.
It's it's a tad bit confusing, like chronologically, because like the time, they kind of made it clear, but like it's kind of bouncing all over the place in like the time of what happens. Like,
are we now 3 years later?
What?
Is that 3 years earlier? Okay.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
Very random.
Yeah, it's not meant to be confusing, but it could be. For instance, the first chapter, you didn't make note of this, happens in 1936. So that visit to Mason City, the one that you read about. But the second chapter takes place, I'm trying to read my writing here, 3 years later, in 1939. But in between 1936 and 1939, there's a reference to 1922. So, yeah, absolutely. You gotta, and you didn't have to know that. You didn't have to know those exact dates. You would never, but you do realize, at least, Owen, what you're realizing is that the time changes. That's the significant thing. And you're gonna have to eventually decide, what happened. I just remembered, I was looking at the last page of chapter 1. And not only does it skip over there, but look what the last paragraph says. Adam Stanton is dead now. Now this is at the end of chapter 1. Judge Irwin is dead, and the boss is dead. So he skips all the way to the end of the book and tells you these things.
Is Tiny Duffy dead?
Tiny Duffy, I'll have to tell you, he survives.
Let's go.
Any other thoughts? That's a good one. I know it's been a while. It was on your mind on Friday. Maybe it's unfair to ask you to think about it, but you spent a week reading it, presumably, or more, a couple weeks. Other thoughts about what happens? What kind of person? Yeah.
Was Duffy at the bar scene? Was Duffy bullying Willie to getting a beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like how then his name, like, after Willie becomes the boss, his name goes from just Duffy to Tiny Duffy. Like
He's a big guy, that's right.
Yeah, but I guess it could also be like just like kind of putting him in his place too.
Yeah.
Condescending.
Yeah, condescending.
And of course, what Willie does, he actually appoints Tiny Duffy as his lieutenant governor. In our state, they're voted on. But in some states, it's like the vice president. We don't vote for the vice president. We vote for the two of them. So he says, keep your friends close, but your enemies. That's exactly what he'll do with Tiny. Yeah.
And I don't remember where, but it talked about
Sugar Boy.
Sugar Boy was driving, and he like swerved so that he would hit a possum that was crossing the
Yeah.
road. Is that like, why, do you know why he included that in the book? Because it seems kind of obscure.
What does it tell you about somebody who would do
Some
such
man
a
wanted to
thing?
see the world burn.
What would that tell you about the person who would do that?
He's evil, not a good person.
Yeah, I mean, something, what would you say? Lou?
It just seems like super reckless, like driving the car as fast as possibly can go.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, just like, especially with cars, it's easy to really good at it, so.
What does it tell you about the man who would hire such a man?
He's okay with having things go. He's okay with hurting things
Right.
and get his way.
Exactly. So it's a good question, and I think those are good answers for it. Other, you met his family, yeah.
Oh, well, I was gonna talk about how like, you know, when it flashes back to the bar scene and like Willie hasn't become governor yet, right? Or he's like not as.
Not in 1922,
Right,
in
right.
1936 he was.
He's not as well known, but even like still then he's able to like hold his ground and like rise above like peer pressure, and so that just shows kind of like who he is, and then that going back to him like holding his ground at like the judge's house, and you know like not wanting to leave until he kind of like gets his way. I don't know. It shows his like boldness. And,
Talking about Willie.
yes, right. And it shows just, like,
We've been told, it makes sense to me, that students who are watching these cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry.
And I mean, you've got a mask over your face, and you're, what, several feet away, so I need to do a better job of repeating what you say. That's maybe not a bad, I won't remember to do that, it'll get tiresome after a while, but I wanna make sure that we get some of what you say on here for
Okay,
people.
sorry.
Yeah, Billy.
One part that kind of made me sad was when Willie goes home and he's like spending time with his father for the first time in a while, and then he just gets up for dinner and leaves the house and is out all night with his father again for a while, and it just finished this whole thing, how like, the parents are being selfish, but they just want you all themselves and all that stuff, and it was kind of like, I don't know, just not very considerate of his father, I guess.
No, but how was Willie using his father?
To get more political advantage.
You get a photo of Willie, the man of the people, with his dad, old man, farmer, you know, that vindicates his popularity with the people, yes.
That's interesting because like how Jack doesn't have, like his dad ran away, he's narrating it, it seems like it's kind of symbolic of that because it shows that he doesn't, like, you could see it as that Willie is kind of evil and leaving his dad, he hasn't seen him so long.
Say that part again.
You could like see it as Willie being evil for like leaving his dad after not seeing him for a long time, but like Jack chooses to see it that the dad's evil for guilting Willie into making him stay. So he puts the blame on the father, I feel
Yeah.
like. He doesn't help people figure his life.
And Willie doesn't have, Willie's father's old, and as you say, Jack doesn't have a father, so Jack sees in Willie kind of a father figure. Yeah,
But I don't think Willie is really even like a father figure in the first place, because when he gets up from the table, like his son doesn't even look at him, and it says something about how his son didn't love him at all, and about how it made it seem like he didn't love his son at all. So
and Willie is a father, he has a son, we know a little bit about, I gave you some notes on that. Where do they go that night? Which is where Jack grew up. Jack Burden is his
That's
name.
his landing.
But they go to meet with the judge,
That's right, and why? That was on one of the questions.
to try to pressure him into repealing his, endorsement of that one candidate.
Right. I mean, he does it in the middle of the night, he doesn't waste time, he's a go-getter, there are things about Willie that you kinda admire. It could be 2 a.m. in the morning, which I think it was midnight, maybe even later, he drives that 100 miles or so, has the conversation and drives back. I kind of admire Willie, but as I think I told you, was it Rebecca Augustine who said she didn't like any of the characters, she likes the book. And that was intentional. I think the writer doesn't want us to find there's no perfect person in the book. Maybe there are people that, I like Jack, and he's certainly not perfect at all. There are things about Willie I like. I like things about Anne when you get to know her a little bit. Tiny, maybe not so much, but he's probably less dangerous than anybody else. You know, Tiny just, he's big enough to do damage, but he really doesn't do much damage. What did you think about the boss? Did I tell you this? I think I did. The writer spent some time in Europe right before World War II, and he was able to see the growth of fascism. It's a popular word today. He saw fascism begin, and it actually began not in Germany, but by that name in, you know where it began? It began in Italy. And you know who the Italian leader was who started fascism? He coined the phrase, I believe, or the word fascism. It's from I think it's a tool of some kind. It's a hammer or something. The word, it's a Italian word or maybe Latin word. That the word, so that's what the word comes from. But it was Mussolini. You ever heard of Mussolini? Okay, he was the one who started. He became buddies with Hitler. Hitler was actually kind of the little guy, and Mussolini the big guy. But his name, Il Duce, as I understand it, means the boss, which is the affectionate term that Jack uses to talk about Willie. But what do you notice about his speech? You'll see another speech in chapter 2. So what do you notice about his speech in chapter 1?
Well, he goes there and he says, like, I'm not here to ask for votes, I'm just here to say hi, that this is my dad. But by doing that, he's really trying to get votes because he's showing that he doesn't really care about politics today, but it's always on his mind and he always wants to vote.
So he's calculating. Everything he does is calculated. It's, in a way, it's not sincere, right? But he's truly somebody in the book who believes the end justifies the means. All of his actions, maybe except his adulteries, all of his actions are because what he wants ultimately is to beat the big guys, you know, the rich guys. So it doesn't matter how you do that. And as far as I know, they don't make up stuff about their opponents. Like he asked Jack, what did he ask Jack to do to get back at But he didn't.
Probably some makeup.
He didn't. He didn't tell him to make up anything. He said, find it. Because that cheapens the whole thing. If you just have anybody can make it up. But his point is, you don't have to make it up because everybody's a sinner, and you can find stuff if you dig deep enough. And so the rest, you know, at least half the book is Jack. There's a whole chapter about Jack looking into the judge's background. You're going to see another speech in chapter 2. You're going to see the kind of speech he made before he changed, and then in chapter 2, I believe it's the chapter, yes, where he actually changes, and you'll find out what changes Willie, what caused him to change his approach. Anyway, any other thought? Do you like Jack? I don't know. I like Jack. I like the way he writes. Any other thoughts about it? Well, we'll do this again Thursday. It'll be fresher on your mind, and I hope you enjoy reading it. Last thing, I want to give back these sheets that she picked up. If I can find where I put them. For what it's worth, I just went back and checked. I had written, distribute biblical allusion sheets. Students may work in small groups to identify each item on the page. I didn't go into any detail, I just identify. And then she says, I told them to just identify the stories. So I don't know what the confusion was, but
Maybe that was misleading.
Where was the confusion?
Oh, I bet it was.
I bet it was misleading.
I bet that was misleading.
Because I don't think she even had that.
who was here?
Miss Weller.
Yeah.
We had this one,
Oh.
the other class had this week.
Miss Weller told us to identify them, like think about them, and then try and match them.
Oh,
She said
okay.
just.
Well, that's not her fault, it's completely mine. Anyway, let me just, we have, just a couple of minutes here. I don't
You
know.
have fun touching that bottle?
I want you to have this, I think it's an important, you'll,
Got a wise guy in the corner, eh?
I love books.
Okay,
Obviously.
then,
Can't copy that.
You're such a wise guy over there in the corner was.
It was good for our brains.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't bad for it.
Somebody not get one back or wasn't here to get one at all?
So, I was here. I don't think I wrote my name on it though.
Oh, that's this one. But you don't have one at all.
I think you're lying.
Right, let me just show you what we had in mind, so we got a lot going on here, so, I'm not gonna ask for it this week, you have something to do Wednesday and you're reading, so maybe when we come back next week at some point, I'll figure it out, but maybe next Wednesday, yeah, at least a week for this, a week from this Wednesday, this is Monday. All I wanted you to do is simply identify who Abraham and Isaac were. That's all. And so I'm assuming these are real easy. But I guess the only way to know is to ask you, who can tell me who, we're not gonna do all these, but just to get started, who are Abraham and Isaac? Parker.
God asked Abraham to show test of faith by sacrificing his son, and then stopped him at the last minute before he actually went through with it.
And Isaac?
And Isaac is the son of
Okay.
Abraham.
Yes.
Should we be writing these down somewhere?
Well, you need to write them down, whether you wanna copy them now or do them on your own. Clay, were you gonna add to that?
No, I was.
Why is Abraham significant to the Bible, to Israel, to the Jewish people? Yeah,
Because I'm pretty sure that he gave birth to pretty much the entire Israeli.
it starts with him. Now, you have Adam and Noah and all those other people, the patriarchs, but the idea of Israel as a state, as a family, starts with Abraham. And of course, what are the Muslim, how do they handle that? That is Abraham. What do they do with Abraham in their culture? Yeah.
Well, don't they say that he's the father of Islam because he gave birth to
That guy.
Ishmael?
Ishmael, yeah. First, you know what the first line of Moby Dick is? They call me Ishmael, or he says, call me Ishmael. So the main character is named Ishmael. That you have to know who Ishmael is to understand where he's going with that. How about Absalom? I was reading a book this summer, didn't finish it, I've read it once. Absalom by William Faulkner. You know who Absalom was? He was David's son. Was he the eldest son? I think he was the eldest son. But anyway, he was his son who rebelled against his father. You remember the story? He literally takes over the government, and David has to leave. And Absalom is fighting David's army, Absalom's army, and David's army. And Absalom is riding his horse, and his hair gets caught in the limbs of a tree.
Oh, yeah.
And when they catch him, and Joab, who is David's commander, puts 3 spears in him, and David wouldn't. He cried and cried and said, "Absalom, Absalom," where the title of that book comes from. So this is all I'm asking. Some of them are phrases like blind leading the blind. Maybe we'll come back to this from time to time, but not before next Wednesday. And if you can do them on your own, that's all we're doing.
Just do all of them?
Yeah,
whenever you do it.
I'm just again identifying it, just kind of
Not really
overall.
just do it. Just do like a good amount, right?
Oh, for next Wednesday, I want us to have done it.
Oh, yeah.
All 146.
Wait, this
we can do
Wednesday or
some of
next
that.
Wednesday?
I'm not too worried about next Wednesday, if we need more time, we'll take it.
But that's when the October is due as well, isn't it?
Is this, I'm talking about next, not
Oh.
this week, come at next week.
Thank you.
The one in the next quarter.
Yeah, there you go, thank you.